and it imprints you and impacts you, and you become formed into the faith. That's great. But sometimes it's nice to know a little bit of, you get a little jump on your learning, and you learn some head stuff along the way as well. So today what we're going to learn is a little bit of church art symbolism. And this is a classic one, okay? So here's what's going on. I-C-X-C-N-I-K-A. What's it mean? Well, this is all basically, it's Greek, okay? These are Greek letters. They're not Latin letters. These are Greek letters. And I-C is really a iota and a sigma, all right? And iota sigma stands for this. Whoops, I got to do better than that. So it stands for this. And in English, or in Latin letters, it would look like this. I-E-S-U-S. So what's that look like? Jesus. It's Jesus, okay? So in Greek, it's Jesus, is how you would pronounce it. Jesus, all right? So that's what I-C is. And you'll see that a lot in church art. I-C, or sometimes you'll see this one. You'll see I-H-S. You ever seen that one? It's the same thing. It's an abbreviation for Jesus, because this is a capital iota, eta, sigma. So this is iota, eta, sigma, omicron, upsilon, and sigma. So it's a Jesus. And so IHS is just an abbreviation for Jesus. And don't get bent out of shape like, you're abbreviating Jesus. The ancient writers did this all the time, especially like in the oldest manuscripts that we have on vellum and on papyrus. Paper was expensive, and so when they were writing anything, they used abbreviations whenever they could to save space. And so Jesus was routinely abbreviated, and it would be abbreviated with either IC or IHS, and they would put a line over the top of it to show that we just abbreviated it. So you'll see that sometimes. So an IC or an IS or an IHS is just an abbreviation for Jesus. So that's IC. So they had what? They had texts before we had text, absolutely, yeah. So then we go to our next two letters, XC, which stands for, of course, Christ, okay? And the Greek here is Christos, all right? And in English it would look like this. All right, so that looks pretty much like Christ. So that's IC. And again, what are we doing? We're taking the first and the last letters, C and the S, or in this case, the X and the sigma, and a C and the C. A sigma is a funny letter because when it's used in the middle of a sentence, it'll be a C. At the end of a sentence, it'll look like an S, and the C and the S kind of go both directions. But it's the same letter in Greek, different times. And the reason it comes up is because you would write it like this, then you write it real quickly with a little hook on it, then the hook just turned into a full-blown S. So that's where C and an S kind of come together. So that's where. But you'll get that. So XC is short for Christos, which is, by the way, when you see Xmas, X-M-A-S, Christians get all bent out of shape. Oh, you just took Jesus out of Christmas. No, you didn't, because the chi is an X, and this is an abbreviation for Christos. And so it's really Chi-mus. And so Xmas is not heathen or pagan, okay? Now, if you want to fully redeem it, what you do is, instead of just writing a chi, you put the rho there with it, because that's another abbreviation for Christus, is the chi-rho, which is taking the first two letters, and you get the PX. But PX really is not PX. It's chi-rho, and the chi is the X, and the rho is the P. All right? Everybody with me on so far? All right. Now we get to the tricky one that nobody knew about, and that's these last four. This is really one word in Greek. It's really one word, Nika, and this is all uppercase. Lowercase, it would look like this. And the N becomes a V, but the V is really an N in Greek. And so this is Nika, and Nika in English would look like this, which looks a lot like what? Nike. Anybody heard of Nike? Somewhat prolific sports apparel brand, okay? Nike, they're all over the place. What does Nike come from? Well, this word Nike in Greek, really it would be Nike, and it would be an eta here, and Nike means victory. That's what it means. And so Nika means victor, so victor. And so Nika means victor. So Jesus Christus Nika. So Jesus Christ victor. That's what it means. So now you know, IC, XC, Nika. So now when you look at your altar Sunday after Sunday and get ready to communion, you're thinking, Jesus Christ, victor, indeed. That's what you're confessing. Yes, sir.
You said the C was a sigma.
a sigma.
Now, I came out of a different background, engineering. In math, sigma is this, also used for some.
Right, right.
It's like a sideways M.
Right, looks like that. And so that's an uppercase sigma. In other words, capital. So if you're gonna, so a sigma would look like that. And you get your mu and your gamma and your alpha. But see, those are all lowercase, and the sigma, that one's an uppercase sigma. That's all. Good question. Good point. All right. So this is stuff you have to learn when you go to university and you join a frat. You learn your Greek alphabet. Or you can become a pastor and you learn your Greek alphabet, and you can do the same thing. All right. There, my little sidebar for the day. I asked you a question, got my answer, and now we're all ready to roll. Article 15, Augsburg Confession. And if you've got your Book of Concord in front of you, crack it open and we're moving forward. Concerning church regulations, and there's a little teeny footnote here, 82. And footnote 82 is real simple. It just says, gives you the German Kirchenordnung. In this article, the 1531 Editio Princeps, which just means one of the early editions of the Augsburg Confession, and then the 1580 Book of Concord, which is sort of the authoritative version, use the singular Kirchenordnung. And so is it singular church order or church orders? Doesn't make that much difference. Church order kind of establishes the idea of the whole thing, whereas little different parts of it. So that's all that is. Not a big deal footnote. So what is this article about? Concerning church regulations made by human beings, it is taught to keep those that may be kept without sin and that serve to maintain peace and good order in the church, such as specific celebrations, festivals, etc. However, people are also instructed not to burden consciences with them as if such things were necessary for salvation. Moreover, it is taught that all rules and traditions made by human beings for the purpose of appeasing God and of earning grace are contrary to the gospel and the teaching concerning faith in Christ. That is why monastic vows and other traditions concerning distinctions of foods, days, and the like, through which people imagine they can earn grace and make satisfaction for sin, are good for nothing and contrary to the gospel. It's a pretty strong language. Good for nothing, contrary to the gospel. We got footnote 83 on this list of traditions, distinction of foods, days, and the like. See footnote 83. Oh, this does help a little bit. Footnote 83 says, these are holy days and festivals, echoing Colossians 2:16, and we can compare there, Augsburg Confession, Articles 26 and 28. Among Lutherans at this time, numerous saints' days were abolished, and apostles' days were sometimes transferred to the succeeding Sundays. But many of the festivals of the church year were retained. Compare the booklet written by Luther, Melanchthon, and others, Instruction for the Church Visitors, and you can look that up if you want to according to those references. So, what's going on here? Saints' days, festival days. What are we talking about? We're talking about these kinds of days that show up in the church year calendar from time to time, like today is so-and-so Saints' Day. For, like, example, September 29th. Anybody know what that is? Yeah. September 29th is St. Michael and all angels. I just remember that one because I like September 29th. I like angels. And so September 29th is St. Michael and all angels. So there you have a saint day. There's St. Peter and Paul, which usually hits somewhere in the fall, if I remember right. You've got St. Stephen's Day, which is the day after Christmas, December 26th. A lot of people know that from the song Good King Wenceslas. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the Feast of Stephen. So the Feast of Stephen is the day after Christmas. So Good King Wenceslas saw the poor man picking up sticks the day after Christmas. So it's really a day after Christmas song, not a Christmas song. So these are the feast days. These are the festival days. And in the Roman Catholic Church, there are a bunch of them. In fact, there's hardly any day in the church calendar that doesn't have somebody's feast day, because there are all these kinds of saints. And so you have some of the big deal saints like Peter and John. These are big deal saints. I mean, one of the apostles. But then you have all these little kind of saints. Like you have these, what they call a patron saint, which is sort of like the saint for my town, or for the saint for my occupation, or for the saint for my family. And you would have the little personal saints. And so in the Middle Ages, there were just saints all over the place, and there were saints' days all the time. And so there were continually these feasts and festivals and these things that had to happen. And there was the idea that if you go and you worship on a saint day, you make that saint happy. And not only do you make him happy, you can win some grace and keep him on your side. So there's all this part of the process of trying to earn God's grace, earn God's favor, and that's where it became problematic. So, how did the Reformers handle this? Well, what's the tone of this article? What are they kind of saying? What should we do with all these saints' days and with all this, kind of apostles' days and these festivals and all these things? What should we do with this stuff? Keep it in the right perspective. This is what's really a unique approach of the Augsburg Confession is, are these things inherently bad? Well, no. Can they become a problem? Yeah. When did they become a problem? The answer is right here in the text. When did they become a problem? When they start linking them to salvation. When people think that doing these things will earn me God's favor. That's a problem. And I would go so far as to say this. It's not just, if I do this, I'll go to heaven. It's not always that crass. It's even the idea, if I do this, I'll get a little extra bonus from God. I'll get a little, perk from God. God will smile at me. I don't think I'm earning heaven. But am I earning God's blessing? Well, probably. And I think, personally, a lot of that thinking does creep into a lot of Protestant thinking. Protestants know better than to think they can earn heaven. But do they think they can earn God's little blessing along the way and earn a little brownie points with God? I think a lot of time. If I do this, maybe God will give me this. I won't earn heaven, but I might get some of God's blessing. It's the same principle, guys. You're just not taking it quite as far. The point is, God gives his gifts. You don't earn them, period. You just don't. It's just the way God operates. And so the key then is to recognize doing these kinds of saints' days and these festivals and things, it's okay. It's fine. And in fact, can be a very good thing, but don't think you're earning God's favor by it. And in fact, they even suggest maybe we shouldn't just throw them out whole hog, which is the temptation of some Protestants. You got some Protestants who, if anything smells the least bit Catholic, out, done with it. You don't want anything to do with it. Get rid of it. And that's why you'll have a lot of Protestants, you say something like the church year, and their eyes just glaze over. They have no idea what you're even talking about. What do you mean, church year? Because all they have is Christmas and Easter, and the rest of the year is just Sunday. There's nothing. There's no church here. They don't believe in Advent. They don't have Sundays after, Easter. They don't have Lent. They just church year. What's that? And it's weird because we're so used to it, but a lot of Protestants operate that way. Why? Church year smells Catholic. Smells like saints' days. Don't want any of that stuff. And so Luther and Melanchthon here are saying, no, we go ahead and we should do these, especially the ones that we can kept without sin and do what? Serve to maintain peace and good order in the church. There's a value in these things. And just throwing them out unnecessarily, that just causes strife that we don't need to cause. We're not trying to cause trouble here. We're just trying to make sure things are done right. So let's do feast days. That's fine. And if you want to have a celebration, for Saint, Jehoshaphat, who's your patron saint in your little town, fine. Have your little celebration, have a worship service, and thank God for Saint Jehoshaphat, and then have your feast of sausages afterwards and punchkis or whatever you want to do. Go for it. Have your little celebration time. It's a good for the community. It's fun to do. And is that sinning? No. But if I think that I'm earning God's favor by having a little festival for Saint Jehoshaphat, now we've got a problem. And that's the attitude.
Didn't the Romans, it says specifically here, the traditions, they value traditions as equal with Scripture.
Yeah.
A true statement? Or?
Well, it depends on what you mean by traditions, and that's a loaded term, okay? And so you're asking about, the traditions, and what about that? It is in the text. It talks about these idea of traditions. So what do we mean by this? And this can be things that are rather trivial, like a St. Jehoshaphat celebration. Or tradition, the same exact word, can be much more meaningful and can be something very significant like the teaching of the church, the tradition of the church. And so when the Roman Catholics say Scripture and tradition, it really is getting at the whole teaching of the church, not just we've always done it that way. That's not what they're saying. So in other words, they're not going to base doctrine based on we just always done it that way. Exactly. It gets a little complicated, but that's the short answer. So tradition is a broad term here. Okay? All right. So, yeah, I saw another hand going up.
I guess I'm understanding what you're teaching, and I guess I'm thinking about today where I guess we're arguing now Christmas and Easter in particular, as the some research says it's based on pagan deity, which I don't know right now, Roman Catholicism kind of Christianizing Christian veneer. How does Article 15 play into that?
It does play into that, and I'll answer that more in just a minute. Okay? You're asking a good question. Your question is, what about some of the pagan origins of some of these things? Like even Easter, the name Easter, where does it come from? It comes from an old Norse goddess or pagan goddess, Easter, O-E-S-T-E-R, the goddess of sunrise. That's where it comes from. That's where we get our word east from, the same thing. Where's the sunrise? In the east. That's where the goddess hangs out. So yeah, so the word Easter, not a Christian word. Is the celebration Christian? I kind of think so. But the word's not. That's why in most even Western languages, the word for Easter is not Easter. What's the root of it most of the time? Anybody? Pasch, P-A-S-C-H, yeah, Pasch, from Paschal, from the Paschal lamb, from Passover. And so in other words, it links to the Passover celebration instead of to the Easter celebration. And this is kind of interesting. And that's in most languages it works that way. English, somehow Easter came rolling in, and we've kind of hung on to that. All right, so I'll unpack that more in a minute, the whole Christmas Easter thing, because we know there are some Protestants who kind of go away from that, and there are even some nutty sort of Protestants, like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons. What do they do with Christmas and Easter? They don't even, nope, pagan, bad. And then you get, well, we say, well, that's dumb, but what about Halloween? I know people who are like, whoa, Halloween's pagan. Christians shouldn't touch that. Yeah, not so fast. But we'll unpack all that here. All right, so the Reformers did not seek to create disagreement. So in other words, I think this is important to notice. They're not in this for a fight. Some people think that Lutherans just had a chip on their shoulder and they just wanted to fight and they wanted to make their own church and they're just trying to attack the Pope whenever they can. No, they're not. They're really not trying to make waves. They're just trying to correct some things. So can they live with all this stuff that's built up around over the ages? Fine, whatever. It's no problem. And that's kind of the same attitude we have. Do we still use the church here? Well, yeah. Do we have saints' days? Sure. Why? We should remember them. We remember our history. Can we learn from saints? Well, yeah. We can learn from things they did. We can even follow their example. Is that an okay thing to do? Sure. Should we pray to saints? Well, no. Why would you do that? You can pray to Jesus. Don't pray to saints. There's no promise they'll even hear you. Besides, if they hear you, what are they going to do about anything? They're just people. All right? And so we don't pray to saints, but we remember them. We appreciate them. Can we thank God for them? Of course. So that's all appropriate. So it's right to have, even a sense of, oh, Mary, she's awesome. Yeah, that's good. A sense of respect, reverence, like you have reverence for a person who is, wise and old. That's what I mean. It's not like you're worshiping them, but you have a sense of respect and appreciation and even reverence. Yeah, that's appropriate. And we should cultivate that. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the idea here. But so we're not out just trying to throw everything away, but we're also trying to make sure it's all done rightly. The key is to remember that no festival, no practice can save a person. So that's not going to get the job done. So, and the reason this is such a sensitive thing is because it was more than just having a saint day. All kinds of stuff grew up around it. Like the thing, they would say that, if you go and worship on St. Joseph's Day, your carpentry business will be blessed and you will thrive. And so they would just start doing this kind of stuff. Or if you bury a statue, I forget which one it is, the saint in your yard upside down, your house will sell. You've heard this. This is a St. Louis thing I've encountered. Because I actually found one of those when I was digging in my yard one time. I dug up the little fell there.
It worked.
Yeah, it worked because I bought the house. But you have to be careful which way she faces, out or in makes a difference, and upside down, but see, that's not cool. That's where you start running into problems. You start getting things messed up. And so this all grew up around this. And you even had, like the relics kind of thing, where if you pray at a certain relic and you hold the piece of the bone of St. Peter, you'll be saved. All this kind of stuff all grows up around this. So festivals can be good or they can be bad. Practice can be good or bad. Some of these we kept. So what are some things we've kept? Well, some of the good things we've kept are saints' days. No problem with that. We've kept that. And we even kept the church year. The idea of a church year having, Advent is different than Epiphany, is different than Lent, is different than the season of Easter, is different than the season of Pentecost. We know that. We've lived in the church. We know what Advent is like. We know what Lent feels like. Hymns in minor keys, and people complain about it, but man, it's Lent, and I love it. And, it's a good stuff. You don't say Alleluia during Lent. Why? Well, it's just what you just don't. That's why. It's a rule. Yeah, it's a rule. Well, is that going to save you? Of course not, but it's a rule. We do these things. You don't get married during Lent. Now we break that rule all the time, but you shouldn't. Why? It's a penitential season. It's not time for a celebration. And what about, giving something up for Lent? Good thing or bad thing? Yeah, it's a good thing. It can be a fine thing because it can help train your body, keep you in mind of what's going on, remind you of stuff. That's great. If you're giving up something for Lent so that God will bless you, good thing or bad thing? Bad thing. You see how this kind of goes? And we start sorting some stuff out.
Another thing with the saints, a contemporary answer is, I pray to St. John because he's going to intercede for me.
Right. Well,
and he's closer to the
right.
president.
This is part of the Catholic piety is when you pray to Mary, you're not really worshiping her. She's not Jesus, but she's got an in. She's a little closer, and it's easier to maybe sometimes talk to mom than to dad, and so you kind of take the back way in, and you work the Mary angle. And this is all the stuff that grows into this stuff. And you're right. And so they will say, no, I'm not really worshiping them. Yeah, but you're thinking that they're going to accomplish something for you, and that's where the problem starts coming in. All right, good. Now, yeah, oh, absolutely. To Jesus through Mary, because Mary will put the good word in for me, all this kind of stuff. Right. All right. So then what else is fine here? Christmas, that's obviously a good thing. Christmas is fine. No problem with that. And other festival celebrations. What about Stations of the Cross? You guys familiar with that? Where you got the different places you go and you think about Jesus during this Holy Week. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Sure, there's nothing wrong with that inherently. If you're thinking that if I do the whole Stations of the Cross, I'll win some forgiveness, that's a problem. But, having Stations of the Cross, that's okay. I know Lutheran churches that have it and are reviving some of this. And a lot of these things we didn't grow up with. We're not used to maybe. Some of this stuff is finding its way back into the church a little bit more after Vatican II, after we kind of are not quite so paranoid about Catholics taking over the world, and we're getting a little better about some of this. But some of these things are fine. And what's really interesting is even a lot of Protestants in the last, I would say, few decades are rediscovering things like the church year. It's fascinating how in the academy world I live in, there are people in the Protestant tradition, like Baptists and Presbyterians who used to have, not Presbyterians so much, but more like Baptists, who have nothing to do with the church here, are now kind of getting interested. Like, maybe there's some value in that. I see something kind of good about that. And it's kind of cool. They're kind of coming back around to some of these things and realizing there's value in these things. There's good stuff in this. All right, so what are some things we got rid of, though, that aren't so good? Well, I can think of one good example here would be a Corpus Christi processional, okay? That we don't do anymore. So that's where you have the body of Christ, and he gets paraded around town, or you take him out for a walk around the neighborhood, and we have Corpus Christi. What's the problem with that? Well, it's really kind of a wrong understanding of the sacrament. It's an abuse of the sacrament, thinking how we're venerating Jesus up there and Jesus is protecting us. We don't do that so much. That's kind of out. The idea of visiting relics to earn penance. So visiting relics or holding on to relics for the sake of penance, yeah, that's out, of course, obviously. And then monastic vows. We don't encourage that either. The idea that I take a vow of chastity or poverty, or I take a vow of obedience, like a monk would have to do, all three of those things. No, because you see, you think you're somehow earning something special from God, doing something more than is expected of you. That's a problem. So, and there's not like it's really a hard and fast thing, because actually some things over here can become negative if we start attributing to them the power to save or bring God's favor. And some things over here could even be theoretically maybe done okay if done with the right attitude, but they get a little bit problematic. So that's kind of how we operate with this. So the attitude we should have, I think, towards rituals and traditions is what? What attitude should we have? What do you think? What's an appropriate attitude to have? Yeah, do them if you want to. If you don't find it useful, then don't bother with it. But I think we should also have an attitude of, you know, the church has learned something from its accumulated wisdom over 2,000 years, and we should be a little reluctant just to throw stuff out or starting things, you know, quickly, which is why people sometimes get irritated. You know, nothing moves fast in the church. That's quite true. That's quite true. And I've learned to really appreciate that and value that, because there's something to be said for why do we do things the way we do them. Maybe there's something going on here, and we need to think about this stuff and be careful about these things. So I think the attitude should be one of an openness and a willingness to embrace these things, and not just to throw stuff out or do something crazy just to kind of stir things up. No, we want to do things for the sake of good order, to encourage and help others. Now, Christmas and Easter. Easter is not as hard, because the date of Easter is set based on what? Yeah, it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox, but it's set according to the Jewish calendar, which is what's going on there, and it's set according to what we know from the scriptural text. So why do we celebrate Easter sometime in the spring? Well, that's when Jesus rose. You know, and there have been different attempts to figure out the exact day, and depends on when you believe what year he died, but we can go back now and figure things out pretty easily, you know, based on astronomy and stuff. And so somewhere in that window, between May 23rd or something like that, the earliest it can be, maybe it's a little later than that, and then later into 3/4 through April, you got that window of Sundays in there. Somewhere in there, Jesus died and rose, and we know that. So that's why that's set. Now, were there spring celebrations already going on in the world, in other places? Sure. And so the goddess Easter would be celebrated in the spring, and so the Christians kind of appropriated some of that and just kind of rolled over on top of it. That happened. With Christmas, it's even more evident, because why do we celebrate Christmas on December 25th? Do we know that Jesus was born on December 25th? Well, no, we don't know. In fact, we don't know really with any kind of certainty at all what time of year he was born. We really don't know. One of the theories I read someplace said that actually the date of Christmas was set based on the date of Easter, because it was thought in the ancient world that really important people were always born or were conceived and died on the same day. This was an idea that was around, and so it was assumed that your day of conception and the day of your death were the same. So if Jesus died in the spring, he was conceived in the spring, so therefore when would he have been born? 9 months later, December 25th. Because the Annunciation, which is March 25th, 9 months before Christmas. So that's where the idea is. Now others say, no, all Christmas is doing is all the pagans were celebrating anyway. Because why were the pagans celebrating at the end of December? What were they doing? They were celebrating the solstice, the winter solstice, which is December 21, 22, right? Which is what? Shortest day of the year. But why is that significant? Because now the days start getting longer. You guys have all had noticed. The sun's going down a little later already. Still January, but man, we're already getting more sunlight. Cool. And so that's the big celebration. The winter solstice, yay, the sun's coming back. We just have to wait a few more weeks, so we'll get a little more spring. It's going to be here. So that was the big celebration. And in Rome, they called it the Saturnalia festival. It's for Saturn, a big celebration. So the idea was the Christians just appropriated that, took it over, and that's what's going on. And that's why you'll get some purists who say, that's a pagan celebration. And my answer is, no. What am I celebrating? I'm not celebrating Druids, and I'm not celebrating the return of spring, and I'm not celebrating the end of winter. I'm celebrating Christ's birth. That I do it on December 25th, and we stick holly and ivy and mistletoe on, who cares? That's my attitude. So I'm taking, I think, a very Augsburg Confession 15 attitude. If you can use a celebration and it's fun, do it. Don't get so bent out of shape about where'd that come from. Now, wait a minute. Are Christmas trees pagan or are they Christian? Well, they're Christian. Luther did it. I'm done. Leave me alone. And so that's kind of my attitude. And so I even rolled that back even to things like Halloween. Because what is Halloween anyway? It's All Hallows Eve. It's the day before November 1st. And what's November 1st? All Saints Day. Christian celebration. So what do you do on All Hallows Eve? You get ready for All Saints Day. How do you do that? Make sure all the demons get scared away. So put your pumpkin out there and, demons stay away. All right, superstition. But in other words, there's something inherently evil with Halloween? No. No. Does it get taken over and messed up? Well, sure. But so in other words, can Christians celebrate Halloween? And do we have, or no, you can't celebrate Halloween. You have to celebrate Reformation Day or Fall Festival. And see, I think that gets kind of silly, in my opinion. So I don't get bent out of shape about that stuff. Just kind of roll with it and enjoy what God gives and keep everything in the right perspective and run it all through your Christian lens, and it's fine. So I think that's exactly the attitude you get here in AC 15. Yep.
So, understanding this, and understanding Confession 15, basically, you have to be beyond being a baby Christian. This is getting into some of the meat.
I missed the last part of this.
As far as the understanding, the differentiate between holidays,
Yes.
how Christians can appropriate that. You basically have to go beyond the baby stuff to being a Christian.
Yeah, you're right. I'm talking as a mature Christian who kind of has a better understanding of things. Now, if there's a new Christian who thinks, and this is true, because Paul even talked about this, if you're associating a celebration with pagan stuff, then don't do it. So in other words, if you have a Christian who's just coming in and he was a Satan worshiper all of his life, and for him, Halloween was the big high festival of the year for some reason, and so should you keep on doing that? Well, for his sake, no, let's not. So yeah, that's exactly right. So there's some sensitivity here and different answers for different situations. But on the face of it, is there something inherently wrong with this? No, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Okay? Good point. Yep.
I think I remember somewhere where the Christians that were being persecuted by the Romans attached their religious holidays to a Roman pagan holiday so that they could celebrate and not be...
There's something to that. Maybe some of those stories get told in an effort to try to diss the Christian celebration, like you're nothing special. And this is very popular in our secular culture. And there's something to that maybe that the Christians would try to get little hide their celebration by celebrating when others are already celebrating. Maybe, but I think some of that gets overblown. I think a lot of it's more speculation than it is reality. All right, good. So let's press onward here. Article 16. Anything else with 15? All right. So let's go to Article 16. Let's go back and listen to what the Augsburg Confession actually says here. Article 16 is entitled Concerning Civic Affairs. That's the Latin title. And the German title is Concerning Public Order and Secular Government. And there's a footnote down here, Politze, derived from the Greek politeia, public administration. Weltlichkeitsregiment, secular government, compare Luther temporal authority. All right, so now we've been thinking what's the order here. We've been dealing with sacraments, now the church rituals, church authority, how things work in the church, the order of the church. Now the shift goes from the church to the world, order in the world. That's the transition here. And Article 16 is fascinating because of the topic. The topic is now secular government. What's that got to do with the church? That's none of our business. Church and politics. No, they don't mix. But here we have Article 16. So let's hear what we have to say. Concerning public order and secular government, it is taught, let me make it a little bigger for you, that all political authority, orderly government, laws, and good order in the world are created and instituted by God. And that Christians may, without sin, exercise political authority, be princes and judges, pass sentences, and administer justice according to imperial and other existing laws, punish evildoers with the sword, wage just wars, serve as soldiers, buy and sell, take required oaths, possess property, be married, etc. Condemned here are the Anabaptists, who teach that none of the things indicated above is Christian. Footnote here talks about some people who are doing that. Also condemned are those who teach that Christian perfection, this is a code word, means physically leaving house and home, spouse and child, and refraining from the above-mentioned activities. Who would do that? The monasteries, the convents, monks and nuns. This is a slam against the monks and nuns. That's what's going on here, okay? In fact, the only true perfection is true fear of God and true faith in God. For the gospel teaches an internal, eternal reality and righteousness of the heart, not an external, temporal one. The gospel does not overthrow secular government, public order, and marriage, but instead intends that a person keep all this as a true order of God and demonstrate in these walks of life, another key phrase here, which we get the idea here of vocation. The German word is Stande, which means the place where God put you. Christian love and true good works according to each person's calling, vocation. Christians, therefore, are obliged to be subject to political authority and to obey its commands and laws in all that may be done without sin. But if a command of the political authority cannot be followed without sin, one must obey God rather than any human beings. Acts 5 kicks in. There you have it, AC 16. There's a lot going on here. And this is a very significant move that Luther and Melanchthon are making in the Augsburg Confession. Now notice also, at the beginning, they're talking about all the things that can happen that a Christian may, without sin, exercise political authority, be a prince and judge, pass sentences. Who's this list mostly thinking about? Yeah, political leaders. Why is that? Well, remember who's confessing the Augsburg Confession? Remember, we talked about this way back in November when I started this class. Who's confessing it? The princes, the political leaders. They're down there meeting with the emperor, and this is a political meeting. And they're saying, this is what we believe. And so Melanchthon is writing this with them in mind. So is it okay for a Christian to be a political leader? Answer, yes. What if being a political leader means I have to use the sword and fight against injustice? Can I do that? Answer, yes. What if I have to go to war? Can I do that? Yes. That's what's going on in here. And so this is thinking especially about the leaders, but then they go to other things. They say, and also buying and selling, taking oaths, possessing property, getting married. This is all stuff that happens in life out there, and is it okay to do? And the answer is, of course. In fact, it's a good thing to do, because the gospel doesn't overturn it, but actually reinforces it. There's a lot happening here underneath all of this discussion. Okay, let's try to unpack this a little bit. Historical setting. We get these poor Anabaptists are getting condemned again. They just take it on the chin all the time. But what's going on with these guys? Well, footnote down here talks specifically about a couple of them who are doing stuff. Anabaptists, as it says down here, refuse to participate in secular government or to take oaths, but approved of marriage in some forms of private property. So we got these guys going on here. And so that's the situation. We've got these guys who are actually kind of getting involved in some of the stuff. Then down here we read even more about some Anabaptists, okay? Oh, no, that's a different topic. I'll pick that up later. So we have these Anabaptists who are pushing against some of this stuff. You actually had people suggesting this. There was a town in a place called Münster where you had people, this was in like east or west of Germany, who had said, we're going to be a town where we're trusting Christ only, and we're going to throw out all things that are not of the gospel. And so they said, all the laws are gone. So no more marriage, no more war, no more sword, no more government. And it was kind of a disaster. In fact, all the other towns got around and wiped them out and said, no, we're not going to put up with this nonsense. We don't do this. And so it didn't end well. But you had these Anabaptists who were saying these kinds of things. And they haven't gone away. They haven't gone away. There are still some Christians who would say, Any use of the sword is wrong. Any use of violence is always wrong. You've heard about these Christian pacifists, kind of thing that, any use of the sword, wrong, 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 wrong. That's the Anabaptist stuff. And the Augsburg Confession comes out clearly in spades. No, that's not ruled out. There's a place for it, but done the right way. Okay? So that's what's going on here. Go ahead.
In understanding the abstinence confession, now, I guess a question about types of government we see today, like here,
Sure.
representative republic.
Yeah. So which governments does this apply to?
I feel my belief applies to all of them,
I think it does too.
no matter what type.
I agree.
I guess that's what I'm trying to understand and kind of trying to wrap my head around that even if totalitarian
It does.
are still being used by God.
Exactly. Yes. In fact, the argument is that the government that is in mind here is all government. And it says it explicitly right here. It says, orderly government, that all political authority, government, laws, and good order are created in the world, created by God. Now, what's the basis for this teaching scripturally? Romans 13, right? So this is one of these times, there are so many times in this class where we could spend forever on a topic. That's another one. The whole issue of church and state, and I'll get to your question here in just a minute, is just loaded. But Romans 13 is very explicitly clear. Paul says the government does not wield the sword in vain. God established it. The government is God's minister. The word Paul uses. God's minister to accomplish good. Therefore, you should obey it. Don't ever disobey it. Now, when Paul's writing that about government, who's the government he's talking about? It's Rome. Who's the emperor when Paul's writing this, most likely? Nero. How good a friend was Nero of Christians? Not good. Nero started pretty good. He went downhill fast. He got kind of crazy in his older years. But Nero was no friend of Christians at all. And yet Paul says, obey them. In fact, the great irony here is that Nero was the emperor who ordered the death of Paul. And so Paul is writing, telling you to obey the government, the very government that's going to execute Paul later. Like, wow. So you're quite right. The form of government does not matter. There are some Christians who are tempted to say, well, if it's a democratic government, yeah, obey it. But if it's a dictatorship, you have a responsibility to overthrow that government. No, you don't. Nope. Sorry. Nope. Question now. I'm sorry, I'm missing. Oh, capital punishment? That's a great question. And where does this all fit? Now, so let's just do a little sidebar here and unpack a little bit here. So let's go back over to the fill in the blanks thing. So now Article 6, this article assumes the distinction between the two realms. And maybe you have heard of this. How many of you have heard about the doctrine of the two kingdoms? All right. That's kind of what's going underneath this. I'm using the word realms instead of kingdoms deliberately, because the doctrine of two kingdoms has been very much misunderstood and misused through history. Because a lot of people think the doctrine of two kingdoms means that God has a kingdom of the church and a kingdom of the world, and that's it. They stay apart from each other, two different things, they never meet. And we have to keep them separated from each other. That's not what Luther taught. And most Lutherans think that's what they believe. And they think that their Lutheran teaching is right on track with good American Jefferson thinking. Because Thomas Jefferson wanted a wall of separation. Yeah. And that's what we want too, because we're Lutheran. No, you don't. Not if you're a real Lutheran. Because Luther recognized that there are two ways that God is operating, but they are not two kingdoms separated by two separate silos. Never they overlap. Not at all. Remember in Luther's day, who was paying Luther's salary? You maybe don't know this. The prince was. The prince did. He was taking government assistance, and he had no problem with that because he recognized there's all kinds of overlap here between these. We have to keep straight what's going on. So now, the two realms, what are they? The one is the left hand of God, and we use this language. Luther used it on occasion, but he had other language he used more often, and the right hand of God. And the left hand of God is the state. And the right hand of God would be then the church. And Luther's more favored terms for this would he be talking about the temporal realm, in other words, the one that's time-bound, and the eternal realm. In other words, the one that is not bound by time. And even more clearly, the temporal realm deals with things in creation, and the eternal realm deals with the creator of all things. In other words, God. So up here, I'm interested in other creatures, and in the other one, I'm interested in how I'm functioning with God. And that's kind of the focus. So the temporal realm is really interested in life, and how we live, and how we operate, and how things work over there. And the eternal realm is interested in my relationship with God, and how I'm right with Him for eternity, and where those things stand. And what God has done in His very careful planning is He has established these two realms side by side. The temporal realm, the world we live in, and the eternal realm, my relationship with Him, and He cares about both of them. They both matter to Him. It's not like the left-hand realm is somehow a little less, not quite as good, maybe even a little bit evil, and, from the devil kind of stuff. Government, it's all inherently evil. Anabaptists thought that way. Anabaptists were persuaded that the government uses the sword. Sword is evil. Jesus said, don't take the sword. They're taking the sword. They're evil. That's how Anabaptists thought about this stuff. So for them, government was always wrong. Luther never thought that way. For him, government is God's tool, God's gift, and God's way of operating. And it's not inherently bad. That's the premise of this whole thing. Now, what you have to recognize, though, is that these two realms then work together in this wonderful kind of relationship in tandem, accomplishing God's purposes, but they have different ways of operating. Because the government basically has one job: keep the world working the way God wants it to work. And what are the rules for that? Well, God's law. Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery. The government should be there to make sure that that stuff happens. That's their job. And what is the church's job? Preach the gospel. Give the sacraments. Forgive sins. Make sure people know where they stand with God. Give grace. Give forgiveness. That's the church's job. Because that's what makes you right with God. And then what makes you right with your neighbors? Following the rules. And don't get those things mixed up. So let the law run the show in the temporal realm, and let the gospel run the show in the right-hand eternal realm, and things are cool here. But do they work together? Of course. They cooperate all over the place. They're doing different things. We got to keep this straight. So Christians who know they're right with God and are set out into the world to take care of their things in the world, can they get involved in the worldly stuff? Of course. Because they need to do that for the sake of the world. And this gets a little bit dicey here. So can a Christian get married? Well, yeah, of course. Have kids, raise a family? Sure. Have a business? Sure. Can he run for political office? Yeah. Can he be a soldier? Can he even kill somebody? Well, if he's doing it as an arm of the state who has the authority to do that, yes, he can. But on his own authority, no, he can't. So capital punishment, is that appropriate in the temporal left-hand realm? Yes, there's a place for this. It's not ruled out. You can get into all the arguments about racial inequities and all this kind of stuff, but is it legit for a government to take the sword for the sake of justice? And the answer is yes. Yes. Which is what we do with war. Think about World War II. You've got the Nazis, Hitler taking over everything. The Western world says, not cool, we got to stop this. Is that a legitimate, just war? Yeah, it's right. Who's waging that war? The government is. On whose authority? God's authority. That's how this works. Same thing with capital punishment. So we say this person has committed a crime so heinous and so wrong that the only justice is for him to sacrifice his life. His life is forfeit for this crime. That's called justice. Can the government do that? Yes. And can a Christian even be the one who's involved in passing judgment? Yes. Can the Christian even be the executioner? And Luther would say, yes. In fact, Luther even wrote this down. If your local town is missing a hangman, go ahead and take care of it, guys. No problem. Luther said this. And people say, whoa, that doesn't sound right. But see, you have to understand the Christian in that case is not acting on his own authority, but acting on God's authority as an arm of the state. That's what's going on here. And so the key move to recognize what Luther's doing here and what Melanchthon is doing here in the Augsburg Confession is they are upholding the government as God's government. That's what you've just got to get through your mind. This is God's government. It's not wrong. It's not evil. It's not twisted. It's not inherently sinful. It's God's government for God's purposes. Okay? Questions? All the way back first.
So Nuremberg trial was Germany. These guys are just saying, I'm just following the government.
Right. So we have the problem of what if the government is telling you to do something wrong? At that point, you are still responsible. We're always still responsible. And so, yeah, thinking about the Nuremberg trials you're bringing up, I was just following orders, the classic, kind of subterfuge to dodge your responsibility. No, God always holds you accountable for the choices you make, which is why the Acts 5 is noted in here. Acts 5 says we must obey God, not men. So if the government orders you to do what is immoral and unjust, you don't do it. And that means, well, I'll get thrown in jail. So what? That's what Christians do. And that's where the conscientious objector comes in. So if the government orders you to go to war and you say, no, this war is unjust, I can't be part of this, don't. And the church has always said, you're right, don't do that. We'll stand with you on that. So that's the correct teaching on that. Now, does that get complicated? Yeah, it can get really complicated. During the Vietnam era, you had people who were being drafted. Some said, got to obey the government, off I go. Okay, yeah, some people, other people getting drafted say, this is an unjust war, I can't go. And what did the church say? Well, the church said they're both okay, because we're all responsible for sorting this thing out, and we have to decide what's going on. Is it a just war or not? And the church probably should have provided a little more guidance, in my opinion, at that time, but that's how we sort those things out. They're not always easy. It can get really complicated. All right, so that's the basic what's going on here in this article. There's a lot more we could say about it, but that's the basics. All right? Now, Luther is getting flack from two directions. He's getting pushback from two directions. The one hand he's getting pushback from, we've already talked about quite a bit at length, which would be the Anabaptist problem. And so because the Anabaptists have this idea that, no, none of this stuff is Christian. Christians don't get involved in any of this stuff. No Christian can be a soldier. No Christian can be a leader. Can't do it. And where we see that today most clearly would be like the Amish. Amish still would never serve in the military, ever, or run for office. And the Jehovah's Witnesses, same thing. Can't do that. Nope, can't do it. In fact, a Jehovah's Witness won't even say the Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag, because you're pledging allegiance to a pagan deity, and that's not acceptable. And so that's the moves they make. And we've always said, no, AC 16 says government is there for a reason. That's not a problem. So that's the one problem. The other problem would be monasticism. And monasticism is a little different problem because they're not tearing down the government, but what monasticism is doing is acting like the temporal realm of the world doesn't matter. All that matters is me and God. So I'm going to go join a monastery and pray all day and get right with God. Cool. But what am I not doing? I'm not taking care of my responsibilities in the world. And this is the big problem with monasticism. So in the Middle Ages, if a man decided, he's married, he's got 6 kids, and someday he had a vision out there in the fields, and God told him he needed to become a monk, and he went off and joined the monastery, well, what happens to his wife and kids? Nothing. They're left destitute. There's no Social Security. There's nothing. And the church actually taught that the man at that point must obey God, not his responsibilities, and they gave the blessing for that man to forsake his family and go join a monastery. That's what's going on in Luther's day. That's what was going on. And that's the whole problem with this monastic movement, because God's superior to the world. And that's why we have to be careful with this. Spiritual things are more important than material things. Really? Not so fast. Be careful here. We have to be a God, not a man. Right, but what is God telling you to do? And the whole point of the two realms is realizing that God redeems me, forgives my sins, and makes me right for what purpose? So I can go to heaven someday? So I can be the person He created me to be, so I can serve the people around me. So I'm forgiven, and I'm made new, and what do? God says, now get out of the church and get back to your life. Get out there and do what you've been put here to do. You got 6 days of work ahead. Go do it. So go do your thing, whether that's a soldier or a government leader or a teacher or an electrician or an accountant. Go do your thing and take care of the people around you. See, that's the key thing. And the reason Luther got so fired up and so angry about the monastic system, even though he was a monk, was not just because they thought they were earning God's favor and climbing to heaven, but because they were rejecting their responsibilities in the world. That's what got him frosted. Because you need to get back out there. And that's where the article ends. Go back here and look at AC 16 at the very end of it. What's the last thing it says? It says that the gospel does not overthrow secular government, public order, and marriage. Because remember, monks said you can't get married. But instead intends that a person keep all this as a true order of God and demonstrate in these walks of life Christian love and true good works according to each person's calling. So get out there and do it. Raise a family. And this is Luther's huge contribution. In the Middle Ages, it was assumed that if you really wanted to be a good Christian, you had to become a monk. Forsake your family, never get married, take a vow of poverty, take a vow of chastity. And Luther said, nonsense. Nonsense. You want to be a really good Christian? Do what God put you here to do. Go take care of your responsibilities. Be a good kid. Be a good parent. Be a good husband and wife. Get married. Have kids. Go for it. That's what God created you to do. This was revolutionary. This just stood the world on its head. AC 16 is like one of the watershed statements in the whole Augsburg Confession because it just shifted the whole mentality of the world at the time from thinking spiritual things to, no, what does God put you here to do? What does it really mean to be spiritual? Do what God's giving you to do. It's enormous. All right, everybody tracking with this? This has huge implications for your life. So, if you want to serve God with your life, does that mean you should quit your job as a dairy farmer in Wisconsin and go to the seminary to become a pastor? No. It might, but it doesn't have to. Can I serve God with my life by being a dairy farmer in Wisconsin? Yes. Just be a good one. Take care of your cows. Take care of your people. Take care of those around you. Do a good job. And is that a God-pleasing thing to do? Yes. And you can say the same thing with being an architect, a principal, a homemaker. It's a God-pleasing thing to do. You don't have to stop doing that to go serve God with my life. In fact, what I hear God saying is, you know, I don't need you to serve me. I'm kind of fine. I'm God. I don't really need anything. Why don't you go take care of your neighbors that I put you there to do? Go take care of them. Don't waste your time praying. Don't waste your time offering sacrifices. Don't waste your time sitting in church, worshiping me. Go out and take care of the people around you. Now, is there a place for being in church? Of course. A place for worshiping God? Of course. But how do you worship God? By doing what He put you here to do. Be a good husband. Be a good father. Be a good in whatever task God has given you. Be a good student. That's what God wants you to do. All right. All clear on this? I think this is a big deal. Maybe you don't. But I think that's a big deal.
So just to verify, when we talk about good works, it's not those verses go being a pastor, speaking to multiple. It's almost mundane in a sense.
I'm sorry, I missed the last part.
The good works that God calls us to do is mainly just, you can say mundane or ordinary.
Yeah, it can be very mundane. It can be very ordinary. It doesn't mean you have to become a pastor or, you know, lead a tent crusade or whatever. Yeah, just do your task where God has given you to do it. And that honors God and serves your neighbor well. Exactly right. Okay? Yep.
Is that, you mentioned small catechism, the head of the household
Right.
should teach, that's the same line of thinking, basically?
That's right. This is the things the head of the household should teach. What's the head of the household doing? He's forming those for whom he's responsible. But he's also providing for them, disciplining them, caring for them. He cares about the created world. This is one of the things that people don't remember about Lutheranism or have kind of lost track of. Lutheranism is remarkable because it actually celebrates the reality of the material world and the goodness of creation and God's desire for us to enjoy these things. So having a family celebration and a nice meal, this is good and God-pleasing. These are right things. These are right things.
Well, isn't that why God created man, to take creation and do something?
Correct. Man is put here to care for the creation, to steward it, and to make a garden. So it's not just wild wilderness, but it's cultivated. That's exactly right. Okay, so this doctrine affirms the goodness of the material realm. This is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. The fact that Luther loved to garden probably plays into this. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed taking care of the things that God had given him. Affirmed is the critical concept of vocation. And that's what I've been talking about here. This whole idea that God has called you and placed you into a position in life or a place in life. A Stande, that's the German word, which just means kind of where God has put you. And where God has put you in life, that's your vocation, do it. Everybody's got a vocation. 9-month-old baby has a vocation. Be a baby. Okay? And already. And so an 8-year-old, does an 8-year-old have a vocation? Well, someday this child will grow up and have a vocation. Nope, has one already. Be a good daughter. Be a good son. A high schooler has a vocation. Probably several by the time you get to high school. Maybe I've got a part-time job. I'm a friend. I'm a daughter. I'm a, whatever, student. And I've got responsibilities in every one of those areas. If you're an adult and you're married, you've got vocation to your spouse, your children, your work, all kinds of places. That's vocation. That's the idea. And that's what's being affirmed here. So what makes a human work or action holy? What makes it holy is it has God's forgiveness attached, and it's done according to his will. So God's grace is attached. He's forgiven you already, and it's done according to his will. And what is his will? Well, it's the law. And so it's following his rules. So if you're doing God's will and following his law, that's a holy work. And it's made holy not because you're a monk or you prayed enough, but it's made holy because God's grace extends to it. All right, that's all going on in AC 16. There's a lot. So not only do we get government, we also get vocation, we get Christian life, and we get marriage. So is marriage a church thing or a world thing? Yeah, God created it, but for what sake? It's for the world's sake. Marriage is a world thing. God defines it, but it's a world thing. You don't get married for the sake of the church. You don't have kids for the sake of the church. Church is God's business. You do it for the sake of the world. Luther talks this way. That might want you to ask questions next time. Let's close with prayer. Oh God, we thank you for the day, for the good gifts of your word that speaks to us and guides and directs us. Help us to grasp well the things you would have us to learn, to practice those things, and to live faithfully in our lives this coming week. Let us serve well those around us in all of our vocations. We pray it in Christ's name. Amen. Blessings on your week, guys. We'll see you back next week in the gym.